In the grey chill of a Moscow autumn, where the air carried the weight of military precision and unspoken hierarchies, Burkina Faso's president, Ibrahim Traoré, stepped onto Russian soil with a quiet resolve that belied the grandeur of the occasion. The Kremlin's red carpet unfurled before him, but the welcome was laced with a subtle disdain, a condescension woven into the smiles of Russian officials who saw him as a symbolic leader from a small African nation, a guest to be indulged rather than respected. At Senchiti, Traoré was Africa's youngest head of state, his red beret and military fatigues a stark contrast to the polished suits of global power. His visit in May 2025, invited by Vladimir Putin to attend Russia's 80th Victory Day parade, was meant to be a diplomatic formality, a chance for Russia to flex its influence in Africa amid strained Western ties. Yet, beneath the ceremonial handshakes, a tension simmered. Putin, flanked by generals and advisors, greeted Traoré with a warmth that didn't reach his eyes, his words tinged with a patronizing edge. "Welcome, Comrade Traoré," he said, gesturing toward a lineup of Sukhoi 35 fighter jets, Russia's pride, gleaming on a secured airbase runway. "Perhaps you'd like to see our toys." The generals chuckled, their laughter a quiet dismissal, as if Traoré, a former soldier from a landlocked Sahel nation, could only gawk at such sophistication. The claim that Putin mocked Traoré's flying skills, as some viral narratives suggested, may have been amplified for drama posts on X, and unverified reports hinted at Russian jets escorting Traoré's plane as a gesture of respect, not ridicule, but the underlying sentiment of underestimation was palpable. Traoré, however, stood unfazed, his dark eyes steady, his silence louder than their laughter. He had faced this before, the assumption that his nation, his people, his very existence was lesser. As they toured the military complex, missiles and armored vehicles gleaming under fluorescent lights, Traoré asked pointed questions about guidance systems, algorithmic protocols, tactical applications that caught the Russians off guard. "Your missile systems mirror the frameworks we discussed at the Pan-African Defense Summit," he noted, his voice calm but incisive. A general blinked, unprepared for such insight from a man they'd expected to be awestruck. At a Kremlin state dinner, the condescension grew bolder. A Russian official, wineglass in hand, remarked, "In Africa, our technology must seem overwhelming." Traoré's smile was a blade, sharp and deliberate. "In Africa," he replied, sipping water, "we've learned that true power doesn't need to boast, it reveals itself when it must." The table fell silent, Putin's gaze sharpening with a flicker of curiosity. This was not the script they'd planned. Traoré, a leader who'd risen through a 2022 coup and championed anti-imperialist ideals, was no stranger to defying expectations. His presence in Moscow, escorted by Russian jets as a diplomatic gesture, was meant to signal partnership, but the undertone of superiority lingered. The emotional weight of this moment was profound. A young African leader, dismissed as a novice, stood poised to rewrite the narrative, his heart carrying the dreams of a continent tired of being underestimated. The pivotal moment came when undeterred by the subtle slights, made an audacious request to fly a Sukhoi 35, Russia's crown jewel of aerospace engineering. The room stilled, the air heavy with disbelief. Putin leaned forward, his voice low but laced with amusement. "These jets cost millions, President Traoré. They're not tourist attractions." The generals exchanged glances, their smirks barely concealed, as if the idea of an African leader piloting their prized machine was absurd. The notion that Putin openly mocked Traoré's flying skills, as some YouTube narratives claimed, lacks corroboration from credible sources like the BBC or AP News, which reported the visit as a diplomatic engagement focused on security and education. Yet, the emotional truth of the moment, Traoré facing a wall of skepticism, resonated deeply. "I understand," Traoré replied, his voice steady as granite, "but I didn't come to be impressed. I came to earn respect." The Russian defense minister suggested a simulator, a safer, more patronizing option, but Traoré's response cut through the pretense. "Why is it always the simulation, never the reality?" The challenge hung in the air, a quiet defiance that shifted the room's dynamic. Putin, intrigued, approved the flight, perhaps expecting a spectacle of failure. General Dmitry Lavrov, a seasoned pilot, whispered to Putin, "Let him try. Humiliation teaches its own lessons." The emotional stakes were electric. Traoré, representing a nation and a continent often dismissed, was about to step into a cockpit that symbolized global power, as he donned a slightly oversized flight suit, a subtle jab at his stature. Whispers rippled among the onlookers. He'll abort before takeoff. He'll scratch the paint, and Putin will have his head. Traoré climbed into the Sukhoi 35, the cockpit a labyrinth of dials and screens. With Major Alexei Voronsky, a decorated test pilot, as his co-pilot. Perhaps I should handle takeoff, Voronsky suggested, his tone polite but condescending. Traoré fastened his harness, his movements practiced, almost serene. That won't be necessary. The pre-flight briefing was rushed, technical terms thrown out in Russian without translation, but Traoré absorbed it all, his silence a shield against their tactics. As the jet taxied to the runway, a small crowd gathered, Putin among them, arms crossed, expression unreadable. The engines roared, and Traoré pushed the throttle. The Sukhoi surged forward, its power a living force, and as the wheels left the ground, something shifted in Traoré. The diplomatic masks, the careful words, the weight of being underestimated all fell away. In that moment, high above Moscow, he was not just a president but a symbol of defiance. A man carrying the hopes of millions who had been told their dreams were too big for their skies. The emotional charge was visceral. A leader from a small African nation, dismissed as a novice, was about to rewrite history in the clouds. What followed was nothing short of breathtaking. Traoré didn't just fly, he commanded the Sukhoi 35 with a precision that stunned the Russian Air Force. Within seconds of takeoff, he executed a vertical climb, the jet slicing through the grey Moscow sky like a blade through doubt. Rolls, controlled dives, vertical stalls, each maneuver was flawless. Defying the expectations of the ground crew who watched, mouths agape. Who trained him? A technician whispered. He's pulling G-forces like a combat pilot. Traoré traced an infinity symbol in the sky, its vapor trail a bold declaration of limitless potential, followed by a series of turns that formed the outline of Africa, silent but searing reminder of a continent's strength. The emotional impact was profound. This was not just a flight but a statement, a rejection of every stereotype that had confined Africa to the margins of global power. In the monitoring room, chaos erupted as Traoré exceeded the authorized altitude, pushing the jet to 15,000 meters, the Earth's curvature visible at the horizon. He's breaking protocol, a technician shouted, but Putin raised a hand, his eyes fixed on the radar. Let's see where this goes, he said, his voice a mix of curiosity and grudging respect. In the cockpit, Voronsky, initially skeptical, now watched in awe. Where did you learn this? He asked as Traoré executed another perfect roll. Traoré's response was a quiet thunder. My grandfather taught me that arrogance is the best teacher. When the French colonized us, they assumed we couldn't master their machines, so they taught carelessly. Their oversight became our education. He revealed he'd trained on simulators built from scavenged parts, flown aging French trainers, and piloted Chinese J-10s during joint exercises, always learning in the shadows where no one thought to look. The emotional weight of his words landed like a blow not just to Voronsky but to the millions who would later hear the story. Traoré's flight was a reclamation, a moment where a man from a nation deemed insignificant proved his mastery on the world's stage, as he brought the jet down, landing with a grace that silenced the tarmac. The crowd now swollen with officials and cameras stood frozen. Traoré stepped out, his uniform untouched by sweat, and walked toward Putin. The Russian president extended a hand, his earlier smirk gone. Maybe I misjudged you, he said. Traoré's reply was simple, or maybe you judged before I had. The chance to show you emotional resonance of this exchange was seismic. A leader who had been mocked, underestimated, and patronized had turned the tables, not with words but with action, his flight a soaring testament to the power of proving doubters wrong. The aftermath of Traoré's flight was a global awakening, its emotional echoes felt from Ouagadougou to Oslo. The footage leaked within hours, exploded across social media, viewed millions of times as the hashtag Burkina Infinity trended worldwide. In Africa, the reaction was a tidal wave of pride. In Bamako, students gathered in squares, chanting Traoré's words, I didn't come to be told what I cannot do. In Accra, a teacher paused her lesson to show the video, tears in her eyes as she told her class, this is what it means to be seen. In Johannesburg, murals of a Sukhoi 35 adorned city walls, the infinity symbol painted in bold strokes. The emotional core was universal. Traoré had not just flown a jet but had lifted the spirits of a continent, proving that potential knows no borders. Beyond Africa, the impact rippled. In Latin America, indigenous activists shared the clip, drawing parallels to their own fights against condescension. In Asia, students debated the Traoré effect in classrooms, questioning why their nations accepted limiting narratives. Even in Western capitals, where leaders had once dismissed African agency, diplomats began reassessing their strategies. In London, a mining executive admitted, "We need to rethink our approach to Burkina Faso. This man changes the game." In Beijing, analysts noted Traoré's appeal as a sign of shifting global leverage, prompting China to offer partnerships without strings to African nations. The emotional undercurrent was a mix of awe and unease. Western powers felt the sting of their own assumptions, while the global South found hope in a new model of leadership. In Burkina Faso, Traoré's return was a hero's welcome. Thousands lined the streets, holding paper airplanes and infinity symbols, their cheers a chorus of reclaimed dignity. A young girl handed him a paper plane, whispering, "Teach me to fly." Traoré knelt, his voice soft but resonant. "The first step is to believe you can." The moment, captured on camera, went viral, a symbol of a generation inspired to dream beyond imposed limits. In Moscow, Putin's team scrambled to control the narrative, emphasizing Russia's generous hospitality, but the story had slipped their grasp. The emotional weight of Traoré's flight lay in its defiance of a world that had long dictated Africa's place. Academic papers began citing the Traoré Doctrine, a framework for dignity-based diplomacy, while universities, from Nairobi to Harvard, taught courses on its implications. In Ghana, a physics professor used the flight to teach aerodynamics, ending with, "The only limits are the ones you accept." The emotional tide was unstoppable. Traoré had not just flown a jet but had sparked a movement, its heart beating in the dreams of those who saw themselves in his ascent. 3 years later, the legacy of that Moscow flight endures, a testament to the power of action over assumption. Burkina Faso's streets now hum with new schools and hospitals, funded by partnerships negotiated on Traoré's terms that prioritize sovereignty over dependency. The African Dignity Fund, inspired by his vision, has grown, powering solar grids and tech hubs across the Sahel, each project a brick in the foundation of self-reliance. In South Africa, a summit on dignity and development produced a continental blueprint for trade and technology, its declaration echoing Traoré's call for equality. The emotional resonance of this shift is felt in the pride of a Kenyan farmer, planting drought-resistant seeds developed locally, in the confidence of a Burkinabe coder launching a fintech app, in the courage of a Bolivian activist demanding respect from global NGOs. Traoré, now a global icon, remains grounded, teaching mathematics in a modest Ouagadougou classroom, his focus on building institutions, not personal glory. In Arling-Arbar, when a Burkinabe woman became the nation's first astronaut, she wore an infinity pin on her flight suit, crediting Traoré's flight as her inspiration. "He showed us the sky is just the beginning," she said, her words carrying the weight of a generation unshackled from doubt. Putin's unprecedented visit to Burkina Faso in 2026, where he praised the nation's pilots, was a quiet admission of respect, a far cry from the condescension of that Moscow day. The emotional heart of Traoré's legacy is not in the jet he flew but in the minds he freed, the dreams he ignited, the silence he created when he proved the world wrong. His UN speech in 2027 captured it best. "I am not an exception but an example of what happens when we refuse to accept the limits others impose." The ovation lasted 7 minutes, but the true measure was in the actions that followed: nations renegotiating aid, communities reclaiming their worth, and a global shift toward partnerships built on mutual respect. The infinity symbol, once a vapor trail above Moscow, now adorns notebooks, tattoos, and murals worldwide. A reminder that true power lies not in machines or medals, but in the courage to soar beyond doubt, to silence mockery with action, and to show the world that potential, once unleashed, knows no bounds.